Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome everyone to this meeting, which is the beginning of a workshop, a year-long workshop that is co-organized and co-sponsored by the University of California at San Diego and the Università di Firenze. The focus of this workshop is, of course, on ideas of decline. And what we are hoping this workshop will do is start a conversation that will continue across the year, but also we hope potentially continue indefinitely. So this workshop, we hope, is the beginning of a long-term exploration of these questions of decline and renewal across all of ancient history. The workshop grew out of a partnership that the two universities have established, a partnership that led to a conference in San Diego a couple of years ago, and had COVID not intervened, a second conference would have occurred in Firenze last year. But what we hope this workshop represents is a way to take advantage of the challenges of Zoom world, but also the opportunities it presents for collaboration around the world. And so we're really grateful that all of you have joined this, and we're really excited about what this workshop will mean for the future, both for the collaboration of the two institutions, but also, probably most importantly, for the spirit of collaboration across different continents and different regions as we explore what positive things we can take away from all of the disruptions of the past year. The workshop has benefited from the generous support of the History Department in San Diego, the Center for Hellenic Studies in San Diego, and also the Vasiliadis Fund for Byzantine Studies. And so we're very excited to move forward with this. And one final note, these workshops will be recorded and posted so that people who are not able to attend them are able to potentially review these later. And so the recording is something that has begun now. And if you're uncomfortable with the recording, this is something we wanted to notify you about in advance so that steps can be taken if you are uncomfortable with it. I will now turn things over to Denise Dimitriou, who will introduce our speaker today.
And hi, everyone. I'm Denise Dimitriou. I'm a faculty member in the History Department at the University of California in San Diego. And before I introduce our speaker today, I would just like to, I'm going to be the person who is going to moderate the question and answer session once the talk is over. So I would like to just ask people who have questions to type them out in the chat window. And I will be asking the questions as they come in when the talk is over. So please feel free to type those questions as the talk goes on, and of course, once it's over. But now let me just say that it's a real honor for me to introduce the first speaker of this series, who is going to inaugurate it, Adalberto Magnelli, who is an associate professor of ancient Greek history at the University of Florence, from where he also received his various degrees. Professor Magnelli has published extensively on a variety of topics, ranging from historiography and geography sort of earlier in his career, to the corpus of inscriptions from Gortyn on Crete, which is an ongoing project, and he's trained as an epigraphist, and from the Onxirinkas historian to a current project that he's involved with on bilingual Greek and Semitic inscriptions from various places in the Mediterranean. And just to illustrate the versatility that we're talking about here, just his publications from 2020 focused on inscriptions from Gortyn. There were several of these. A 15th century Venetian book, The Dream of Polyphilas, and a bilingual dedication in Greek and Sidetic from Seleucia. So this versatility to deal with these different kinds of texts on different media and in different periods is inspiring, as is his ability to deal with all of these different languages. So we are honored that he agreed to be the first speaker of this series. And today his talk will be on a topic that's different from the ones that I've mentioned. And the title of the talk is Peace versus War, Athens and the Decline of Imperialistic Strategy during the second half of the 4th century BCE. So Professor Magnelli, thank you. And I will turn over to you, things to you now.
Hi to everyone. I thank Denise for the too kind presentation. I apologize to those present, but I have to read my contribution today. So, first of all, I would like to thank Edward Watts and Giovanni Alberto Cecconi, the creators, coordinators, and organizers of this cycle of lectures, a second act of the collaboration between the DLF of Florence University and Arts and Humanities plus Center for the Hellenic Studies, University California of San Diego, inaugurated with the workshop in May 2019 and continued profitably until today. I also would like to thank all colleagues from San Diego and Florence, as well as the PhD students and all students who have actively participated in the success of this event, and colleagues from the other universities, Italian or foreign, who have kindly and enthusiastically joined the initiative with their own contribution. Herein, I will present the very first results of our research on the concept of decline of the imperialistic and expansive idea regarding the foreign policy of Athens during the 4th century BC. These are only initial reflections, currently lacking in absolute completeness and total organicity, susceptible of confirmation through a further analysis of literary and documentary sources or evidences, but which, starting now, could lead to some interesting questions to be and consequently stimulate new reflections. A recent study on financial policy implemented in Athens in the second half of the 4th century BC, conducted by a team of experts in ancient economics composed by Emmanuel Marios Economou and Nicholas Kyriazis, University of Thessaly, intended to put the emphasis on the relationship between the choices of internal finance and the foreign policy strategy adopted in the period in which very significant leaders such as Eubulus and Lycurgus emerged. In fact, it is argued that the latter would have democratically persuaded their fellow citizens to abandon war strategies in favor of those of peace through a series of expansionary politics, which not only raised the bloodless Athenian state coffer, but would soon become the means through which the various social classes would increase their personal well-being and incomes. Specifically, the terms of the question could be summarized as follows. After the Clisthenes reforms, Athens gradually developed what we could define the most advanced system of direct democracy of antiquity, according to which every citizen had the right to express their opinion on every proposal presented in the Assembly, from those of foreign policy, relating, for example, war or peace, to simple measures of domestic policy. They range from the famous naval law of Themistocles to issues of monetary or currency policy, such as the Nikophones monetary law of 376 BC. It has been estimated, with all probability, that during the Attic years, citizens used to meet about 40 times in the assembly to decide on a political decision or a simple bill. In this regard, Manville and Ober have argued that such active and daily participation in the affairs of state will be at the basis of the full success of the Athenian system. Citizens, as active members of the state, were undertaking leading positions in public life. They were becoming better as personalities themselves and more efficient as members of the society as a whole. In the contrast, in the constant practice of democratic principles, although with very brief interruption, Athenian society during the period between 508 and 322 BC essentially managed to become flexible and absolutely receptive to the necessary change and adaptations to the changed international landscape. If we want to use a contemporary definition, Popper 1966, we could affirm that Athenian society presented itself as a really open society, in which citizens orient their choices through a series of options, rather than between a simple policy or another. In this respect, every citizen had the right to vote for or against any proposal made by other fellow citizens before the assembly. And they certainly did so in a rational way. Everyone maximized their individual well-being. Starting from this assumption, the authors developed a mathematical model. Sorry, I changed the slide. A mathematical model on which we do not intend to dwell here, for which the maximization of individual interest comes from a function in which the various strategies constitute the set of choice suited to respond to the individual well-being of each. From this follows the fact that the socio-political system became more flexible and receptive to change as more strategies were introduced. In this case, the authors demonstrate how, in specific terms, a flexible and receptive system, such as that experienced by the Athenian society of the 4th century, could push the participants to abandon a consolidated strategy in favor of the exactly opposite one, that is, to choose peace instead of war. More in detail, it is argued that the humblest social class, Thetes, who obtained the maximum well-being from an imperialistic strategy based on naval warfare, aggression, and plunders, could be induced to choose the opposite strategy, propagated by the noble class of the landowners, where the latter had allowed to rebalance the benefits for the poorest class through a policy of contribution, which, if they would certainly have decreased the income, would have allowed to minimize the losses due to the war attitude of the police. The events that led to such a reversal in the strategic field are well known. At the beginning of the 4th century BC, Athens attempted to rebuild its naval league, which was abolished after the defeat in the Peloponnesian War. This experiment, dated 377 BC, however, had limited success, as long as some cities felt threatened by Spartan power and therefore needed some protection, they remained faithful to the pacts with Athens. But following the sudden decline of Sparta after Leuctra and Mantinea, the allies began to distance themselves from the Athenian Symmachia, not least because they no longer had to pay contribution to the federal coffers. The subsequent useless Athenian attempt to maintain hegemony over the allies, which gave rise to the disastrous social war, led to a progressive decrease in the annual income for the coffer of the Athenian treasury. Due to the decrease in customs duties as a result of decrease in the volume of trade and the concomitant increase in current business spending, revenues dropped to just 140 talents per year. And yet, despite the fact that the polis was in a situation of real economic recession, the majority of the poor still voted for the continuation of a war policy, because many of them maintained stable employment as oarsmen in the fleet, which in times of war normally counted between 50 and 100 ships, offering employment from a minimum of 8,000 to a maximum of 15,000 individuals. If we estimate with good probability the population of Athens in the mid-4th century at 30,000 inhabitants, in practice, from a quarter to half of it could find employment in the Navy. Furthermore, serving in the Athenian Navy, even during the war, was an activity that in the 4th century proved to be relatively safe. After the victorious Battle of Naxos in 376 BC, the Athenian Navy had reestablished a certain supremacy in the Aegean. Therefore, in the following 50 years, at least until 322 BC, at most, it found itself facing a series of skirmishes without major losses compared to those of the clashes of the Peloponnesian War. All this raised the discontent of the middle class of peasants and large owners, who, with the continuous naval wars, saw their income reduced and the regular conduct of trade threatened. Such divergent interests led to frequent clashes in the assembly, so that Eubulus, the main politician of the 50s, proposed a compromise between the various interest groups. Using the fund called Theoricon, on whose origin and initial function there is still a lively debate among scholars, the skilled speaker wanted to persuade the Thetes to abandon the war strategy and opt for the peace, as invoked by the Hoplites. The money drawn from the Theorica would have constituted compensation in favor of the poorest citizens, not only for participating in public festival, sacrifice, and various kinds of spectacles, but also as a package of aid for the redistribution of wealth, a sort of reimbursement for the loss of salary linked to the navy. Eubulus also relaunched a vast building program aimed at the further embellishment of the city, within which Thetes could find opportunities for secure employment and wage. In this sense, Eubulus passed a law that would make it difficult to use the surplus of public finances for military operation, leaving it available to public works only. A new network of roads, a more rational system for the city's water supply, new shipyards were designed. 3/4 of the warships were redeployed in the newly built ports in Zea and Munichia, in order to make more space available in the central port of Piraeus, exclusively for merchant ships. Consequently, also the legislation in the field of commercial law was improved. In order to increase the Theoricon's coffer, was introduced the so-called Pentecoste, whereby 2% of the sums on the value of exports and imports were paid into state coffers. In every way, an increase in the volume of trade and a more intense exploitation of state properties, such as the Laurian silver mines, were favored. Eubulus also proposed that the aisphora, the tax on goods paid by the rich during the war, should become a permanent contribution as an additional source of revenue for the state budget, in order to finance contributions such as the Ecclesiasticon, Theoricon itself, and the whole public building program. The compensatory role of these reforms would be evident. The measures desired by Eubulus would therefore have allowed the Thetes to abandon the propensity for imperialistic politics marked by war, as the expenses necessary for their maintenance, previously derived from the extra of the war, now would be absorbed by the Theorica surplus. On the other hand, the rich would no longer be overloaded with war expenses, resulting in a ruinous decline in annual income. In the period in which the expansion of the internal fiscal policy took place, it is estimated that the state revenue increased from 140 talents in 355 BC to more than 400 talents in 340, the year of the probable date of Eubulus. This policy, centered on a peaceful strategy and interrupted by a resurgence of war caused by Macedonian expansionism, was resumed by Lycurgus, another important figure of political leader who continued in the wake of his predecessor and implemented an internal policy that not only allowed Athenian revenue to reach the figure of 1,200 talents per year, following the expansion of fiscal measures, but allowed the polis to enjoy a long period of peace and collective well-being. Once again, the economic driving force was a massive public works program that allowed full employment and a secure wage to the vast majority of the humblest layers of the Attic population. The extraordinary results obtained by the Athenian economy over the period 355-322 BC, they were not just the result of fiscal expansion program. They must also be attributed to a stable economic and political context, now guaranteed by the peaceful strategy introduced by the two skilled politicians. Efficient banking services and the granting of maritime loans were considered during the 4th century as normal economic transaction, and this favored the progressive consolidation of the economy of the period. Clearer provision allowed the stipulation of contracts with more reliable clauses for the contracting parties. At the same time, the transactions were facilitated by provision such as the aforementioned and well-known law of Nicophon, which guaranteed that the coins used in every financial transaction were pure and reliable, therefore welcome in any international context. If, therefore, as claimed, the program of Eubulus and Lycurgus managed to balance the conflicting interests of the main social classes of Athens in the 4th century until they reached a balance based on the idea that democratic development could be sustained better in a situation of peace than of war, helping to decline the imperialistic hypothesis, which had characterized by the political and economic choices of the previous century. The question we should ask ourselves is the following: was it only the brilliant idea of a skilled statesman to inaugurate this trend, or the ideal of restoration of democratic imperialism and the war option were already declining in the period after the end of the Peloponnesian War in favor of a peaceful approach to international relations? Is there any documentation beyond the rhetorical proposition of Andocides or Isocrates which can testify to this changed political climate in 4th century Athens? From the testimony of the Hellenica Oxyrhynchia, we learn that in the Athens of the very first years of the 4th century, the moderate component, which we could define that of the landowners and hoplites, inclined towards a prudent strategy, which maintained faith to the agreement with Sparta stipulated after the restoration of Thrasybulus, and did not venture into hostile acts such as those that could be seen behind the so-called Demenetus affair and the possible contacts with the Conon's fleet in Caria, committed to preparing the anti-Lacedaemon recovery. We wonder if in this regard it is possible to identify some formal act, some provision that could verify the emergence and development of such a policy that placed peace, Irene, at the center against the war. We, therefore, intend to draw attention to an epigraphic document, still much discussed, namely the Proxenis Decree, e.g. 227, voted by the Assembly and the Athenian Council in honor of Heraclides of Clazomene. The matter is well known. I will recall briefly a few details. I changed the slide. It is a portion of a Pentelic marble stele, originally erected on the Acropolis, damaged on all four sides, to which Frank Walbank in 1982 added a fragment in the lower section, a sort of postscript, from which we recognize the ethnicity of the honored Heraclides Clazomenaeus. The document contains almost two texts. The first one, with only the remains of 4 mutilated lines, probably granting citizenship to Heraclides. It could be a sort of introduction to the second text, lines 5 to 25, recording the form and grants of proxeny to the same individual, with the possibility of owning a house and land in Athens, lines 20-21, take advantage of the Atelia, line 21, and even enjoy the inviolability of the physical person for themselves and their children, as well as all citizens by right, lines 22-25. Beyond the interesting consideration made by the most recent scholars on the form, which would seem more suited to a text of the 4th century rather than a previous one, it should be underlined how traditionally the decree is referred to the 20s of the 5th century, during the Peloponnesian conflict. This dating would be based on some indications of the prescript. The tribe that exercised the prytany, for example, which would have 9 letters, given the stochastic setting of the epigraphic mirror, would be identified with the Acamantis filet, rather than with the Pandionis, since, by prosopographical reasons, the name of the current presidents, who on the stone retained the final part, Eocleides, here it's possible to Eocleides here, in this Eocleides, could be integrated only with the names Neocleides or Theocleides, which, according to Lexicon of Greek Personal Names, are known only for the first tribe, the Achamantis. Furthermore, commentators would prefer the first of the two names, as a similar name would be mentioned as secretary of the Aegeis tribe in the provision of 424 BC, Inscriptiones Graece 175, and so into other fragmentary texts of the same year, Inscriptiones Graece 136 and 74. Given that the same character could act during the active year as epistates of the Prytanis of his own tribe, and at the same time as secretary for the Prytanis of another tribe, it was therefore considered that this character was also identifiable with the president in office at the act of the promulgation of the decree in honor of Heraclides, thus referring it to the year 424 BC. All this would accord with the historical context, which for this year recalls the signing of the peace treaty known as Epilikos, named after the uncle of the speaker Andocides, the only SARS to remember the event, on the peace 29. In fact, the body of the decree for Heraclides, line 18, mentions spondai and an embassy that would be sent to Athens by the Greek king, line 16, Ipeide oi presbis oi parabasileos econtes, probably following a previous sending of ambassadors to the Persian palace by the demos. The same treaty the Athenians later abandoned to support the rebel Amorges against the king. Without going into the merit of the possible veracity of the Treaty of Epilikos, which in some way would have renewed the pacts between Athens and Persia already stipulated with the Peace of Callias, it will be sufficient here to dwell on the structure of the prescribed additional element useful to propose a dating of the measure within a different historical context. Beyond the correct paleographic observation by Harold Mattingly, otherwise not absolutely decisive, which in themselves suggest a lowering of the date compared to the last quarter of the 5th century, it seems to me that precisely the prosopographic data can offer a starting point for further consideration. If it is true that the name Neocleides is mentioned several times in the bulletic context around the years 425-424 BC, it is, however, indubitable on the basis of the epigraphic testimony that it was precisely in 424 BC the Achamantis tribe presented a secretary with a different name, Phenippus. See, for example, EG 1, Inscriptiones Graece 161. Then the name we can infer from the remains of the decree of Heraclides, in which at line 6, Eprutanewe, this is the letter. Here, the remains of this letter is sigma. In the line 6, we find the sequence S e grammatewen, which provide for the secretary of the Boule a name of no more than 6 letters, starting with sigma. The sigma is here. It's possible to. This is the squeeze of the inscription, which exclude the identification between the two. If the secretary of Acamantis was Phenippus in 424, Phenippus not start with sigma. However, we can add more. The name Neocleides, in the form with the diphthong expressed in E typical of the 5th century, is found as president of the Acamantis tribe and accompanied by a secretary of whom we see the name Hippos in another famous decree, the one that concerned judicial measures inherent to the Phaselis polis, Inscriptiones Graece 110. This Athenian decree for Phaselis polis. This last document, dated between 460 and 450 BC until recently, has now been dated again on the basis of convincing paleographic, linguistic, and content consideration, precisely during the 20s of the 5th centuries. It will seem natural to compare it to the set of documents already mentioned in which the name of Neocleides appears. It seems evident then an epistates of this name belonging to the Acamantis tribe with secretary Hippos is the detail is here. Hippos is the name, is the possible Neocleides is Jameson proposed this name, cannot be identical to the same one present in the decree for Heraclides. At the same time, we could also question again the very presence of the Acamantis tribe in the decree for the Clazomenius, called in question because the only one in whose list the names of Neocleides or possibly Theoclides appear. Unless we hypothesize a dual mandate as a Boulef test for the Neocleides in question within a very short time, it would seem more prudent not to propose immediate identification for the president of the Prytanis of e.g. Inscriptiones Graece 1:227, whatever it was called, or for the tribe of membership. In this way, the only data that can have chronological relevance within the decree remains the mention of the honored one, Heraclides of Clazomene, a man at some time serving as foreign general, see, for example, Plato, Ione, Ateneo, Eliano, a man who Aristotle recalls in the Atenaion Politeia 41:3, Proton men Agirius obolone porisen, metà de Tuton, Heraclides o Clazomenius or Basileus Epicalumenos diobolon, as the proponent of the raising of the mistos ecclesiasticos from 1 to 2 obols at the end of the 90s of the 4th centuries. This statement, dismissed too hastily as an editor's error appears to be extremely interesting if one actually wants to connect it to the decree in question. In other words, if the act that honored Heraclides could be dated between 393 and 390, is the date of the provision, I don't think it would be out of place to reconnect it to what was already proposed by Magnelli about the opportunity for this determination to be included in the long preparatory phase of the treaty between Greeks and Artaxerxes II, known as the King's Peace of 387-386 BC. Certainly, there will have been embassies between polis and royal administration before 387 BC. Xenophon Hellenica, Book 4, recalls an embassy by the Athenians to the king in 393. But it's possible there were others. There were others during the period. Compare, for example, Plato Comicus, who noticed an embassy by Epicrates and Formisius in 394. I am also reconsidering a possible relationship between Heraclides' decree and the one in honor of Straton of Sidon, usually dated after 374 BC, but now raised to at least 388 BC or earlier. It is the granting of proxeny to the dynasty following the good offices of the latter towards Athenian ambassador sent to the great king of Persia. So Heraclides could have played a leading role in favoring an agreement with Athens, perhaps as regards the condition of the well-known cleruchies of Lemnos, Imbros, and Skyros, which the treaty reconfirmed as Athenian possession, hence the honors and subsequent concession. But if this hypothesis could be confirmed, it must be reconsidered the provision wanted by Heraclides regarding the increase in the daily allowance due to those who participated in the assembly. The proposal was controversial. According to Aristotle, the ecclesiastic pay was introduced because it was difficult to get the Platos, the masses, to attend the assembly. The scholars state that the sponsors meant ecclesiastic pay to serve as political and poor relief. So, more than a simple demagogic act, the provision could represent the will of the same Heraclides or of the moderate democratic group to which he could belong to support the poorer urban class that with peace came to lose the proceeds deriving from the war strategy. In essence, we ask ourselves, is it possible that the peaceful strategy supported by macroeconomic and fiscal measures, which emerged from the middle of the 4th century, thanks to the policies of Eubulus I and then Lycurgus, traces its first expression at the beginning of the 4th century, when a part of the ruling class was increasingly convinced to make economic sacrifice for compensatory purpose in order to dissuade the demos from the aggressive policy and military expansion as implemented in the previous centuries. In this, we could recognize a really strong caesura in the history of Athens. The concept of imperialism, beyond the failed revival of the Second League, was now heading towards a real decline. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Magnelli. That was really interesting. So just to remind everyone, I mean, you should imagine all of us applauding you now. I just want to remind everyone who is watching this that if you do have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat window, and I will pass it along to Adalberto. So while everyone is getting ready with that, may I ask?
Yeah.
And then I just have a small comment also. I mean, maybe the small comment first, because as you were talking about the decree for Heraclitus of Clazomenae, I also thought about the decree regarding Straton because of the parallel.
Straton,
you know, like Athens rewarding somebody because they had helped their ambassadors going over to the king. And I know the recent dating by Matteo for the Straton.
Matteo, yeah, Matteo.
Yeah. But I would, I think we have to be careful about the dating of that decree, because if we look at and not just date it based on Athenian, or what do we think, I guess, about Athenian epigraphic practices and letter cutters, because the coinage, the Sidonian coinage, has a completely different.
I know the Sidonian coinage.
Yeah, so I still think that Colasso Castaldi's dates are, you know,
Enrica Colasso.
You would agree. Anyway, so that's the small comment. And then my question is more about, like, how do you reconcile Xenophon's poroi or all of the other decrees that are coming out of Athens in the 330s, let's say, and 320s, so a little bit later than the period that you were talking about, that are honoring all the non-Athenians who are bringing in grain into the city. I'm wondering, like, how that fits into the picture, the picture of the finances of Athens that you painted. Just, you know, because I'm not an economist, I don't know how all of these things all fits in, but yeah, so that's my question.
It's a matter, a problem with Xenophon poroi. But I have to analyze deeply analyze this problem. It's also at the start of my research about this this problem. So I have to analyze too this. But I think that we have a change in the concept of foreign policy in Athens, before and after 403, before Thrasybulus restoration and after Thrasybulus restoration. We have seen the policies of Athens is intend to rebuild the league, but it's not sure this. They rebuilding the league, but it's not the same league as in the 5th century BC. So I think Athens had big troubles inside with the finances, and the Athenians think of the problem, about the problem of the finance, it's better to change politics. Only few inside the Democratic Party, on my opinion, thought to rebuild the league, the Delian League. Other problem is the masses, because all the Tetes, but also the Zeugite, want to have the income from the Navy. This is the real the real matter. The Navy, and the Navy is not commercial, but for from the war, reward from the war. So if I have 3 obols for the assembly, 3 obols is the same for the same income from the Navy. It's the same. It's possible to have 3 obols without war. This is the concept. So Xenophon was outside Athens, and see all the situation outside, from outside. I think this is the problem. Not know exactly the balance between the party, the factions in Athens. But I have to analyze better this problem, this matter.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really interesting. I mean, that's an interesting answer. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, I guess, and it's not an easy subject to sort of decide.
Okay.
So we have a couple of questions coming from other people. One is that there's I'll read it out loud. So there's a peaceful Athenian policy after the Battle of Chaeronea, basically 338, was primarily enforced by Macedonian supremacy over the common peace, so the Koine Erini. Of the League of Corinth. But huge sums were spent on the Navy and its infrastructure between 338 and 323 BCE. And there were red lines. So for example, the clerichy on Samos, the island of
Samos clerichy.
Yeah, so I think the question is just how to reconcile these two ideas of one, the Macedonian supremacy, and then like the amounts of money that are going to the Navy.
Because until the 322, we have not really Macedonian supremacy on the sea. Before, Athens have a little supremacy. So the problem with the clerichy is normal for the Athens state. Samos, Lemnos, Imbros is like Athens, not different from Athens. The clerics were all Athenians, so it's not really warfare supremacy, strong supremacy, but I think Athens had until this period a little supremacy in the Central Aegean, on my opinion. But it's very interesting to analyze also this question, this problem.
Yeah. Thank you, I guess, on behalf of the person who asked the question. Another one, how much of a generational issue is there here or may actually be affecting these decisions when we see a shift from focusing on the military because of the very real threat of Sparta, to the younger people who maybe are taking peace for granted. So does this play any role in the kinds of changes that you see?
The role of the young people?
It's sort of having a generational shift between an older generation who takes for granted Sparta as a threat, because it was, in
Sparta, yeah.
Versus like the younger generation who take peace for granted, because this is of course after the Peloponnesian War and they live in a period of relative peace, or at least it's not a major war against Sparta.
No, I have not understand.
Okay.
The problem is that the generation, the younger generation after the Peloponnesian War.
Yes, so are they thinking about these kinds of policies differently than their parents, for example?
Right. It's possible. It's possible, but we have not sources about this. Little we know about this. We have only in the epigraphic field such informations. It's difficult to have a red line, from the generation of the war and the generation after the war, because we have only the source of Isocrates, but it's sophisticated. It's not really. It's orators, rhetoric source. We have the rhetoric source, a little evidence from the epigraphy, but we have not all to understand exactly the real difference between these classes of age.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask the people who've asked questions whether you want to follow up on anything? Then I can see if I can figure out how to allow you to ask a question. But in the meantime, I guess I'll ask another one. So in the Aristoteles decree, the Athenians promised that the new league will be totally different than the Delian League. And it's a strange text. It's strange that the demos presents negative purposes in an official document, right? Because they say we will not do X and Y.
We will not.
So for you, Adalberto, what is the meaning of that explicit declaration of all of these?
Rhetorical.
Rhetorical
means, yes. We don't want the Athenians were speaking to the king. We don't want the supremacy in the Aegean. This is a problem. The real problem, the supremacy in the not only warfare, but also in the commercial relationships in the Aegean. So it's totally different, but I think the leaders of Democratic Radical Party want exactly the same. Wanted the supremacy in war supremacy, in navy supremacy in the Aegean, such as the First League, I think. So it's a rhetoric composition because the Athenian, for me, on my opinion, because the Athenians and the great king have a new relationship through the peace. we have before the peace of Antalcidas. We have testimony of treaties between the king and the Athenians before 386. We have agreements about the commercial, about military expansion, about the police along the shores of the Anatolian. This is a problem. So with this proposition, the Athenians say to the king, no, it's little, it's only our little confederation, not have relationship to the hegemony over the Aegean Sea. It's possible.
Yeah, thank you.
But I don't know. I think so. It's difficult to have real answers to this problem, because we have it's difficult to reconcile all the sources, documentary and literary sources. It's not very easy. Athens is difficult.
Yeah, it's funny. Despite the wealth of sources, it is still
we have difficult for the sources. It's quite different. If you read Andocides, you have an idea. If you read Xenophon, another idea. Not very easy to balance all, with the epigraphic evidence also, and also with the Oxyrhynchian historian. It's another problem, the Oxyrhynchian historian. And the tradition, Ephoros, Theopompos tradition, very difficult too.
Yeah. I have one more question that has come in. What do you think is the size of this radical faction among the Athenians? Is it a minority, or is it a significantly larger?
Until the 360 is larger. It's larger, but not at the level of the upper class. The leaders are not are few leaders were for the radical parties, but the masses were all for not for the radical party, but for the well-being. So if I have employment in the Navy, I vote for the Navy. I vote for the war. I vote for the radical party. If I have employment in the program of public building, I vote for this. It's not a problem. Not ideological. Not ideological, because if you read Xenophon or Aristotle, this is a problem, ideological problem. But I think the masses don't have this problem, not ideological. It's only the welfare, the well-being, the income. So until the 360, we have the larger is the radical party. After the social war, absolutely no. For me,
Yeah. Let me just ask if anyone has a follow-up question or any other questions. And And if not, then thank you, Adalberto.
I
And
thank
I don't know
you.
if you want to.
I thank you, Denise and
No,
Igor,
thank
and
you.
all,
This was really great.
everyone.
And Ed, I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adalberto. This was really
Thank
wonderful
you,
and a wonderful
everybody.
way
Thank you, Igor.
to start things off. I think maybe for our closing words, we can have Giovanni Ciccone, who is organizing this on the Firenze side, maybe close things out. So
yes,
let's
yes.
turn things over to him.
Giovanni.
Just two words to declare my satisfaction. I'm pleased for this, for the participation. Can you hear me? Ecco, è saltata la linea. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Giovanni.
No, but
Perfect.
you all know me, or almost you all know me, and I have ancestral fears that for the technical success of the whole thing. So I am pleased for the participation. I thank very much either Adalberto and Denise for their commitment for this in this first occasion. I am confident that in the future the participation will improve. The number of I am satisfied that many pupils and colleagues from Florence and colleagues from my pupils and students from San Diego were here tonight in this strange situation where Italian and European people at the end of a working day, American colleagues at the beginning, before the working day begins. So I hope that we all will be here on 30 April for the talk by Mira Balberg, who will speak about rabbinic literature. And the moderator in that occasion will be our Florence colleague, Enrico Magnelli. Enrico Magnelli has written me and he apologized for not being present tonight, and he will be here in the occasion of the talk by Mira Balberg. And what else? This San Diego Florence agreement has had a strange fate because we were in San Diego 2 years ago, 5 wonderful days, and in September 2020, the conference that we all were organizing on the topic of persuasion, with the participation not only of historians but also by philologists and ancient philosophers and so on, was blocked by of course the pandemic situation. And this conference will be held, I hope, in September 2022, the next September. And I think that internationalization is a word very abused in a way. Can be something similar to what we are trying to do, to compare methods, knowledge, and exchange all this. And another thing that I would like to say concerns the fact that we are trying to open, Edward told this at the beginning of this evening, we are trying to open our agreement and our initiative to European colleagues, American colleagues. I thank very much all, not Florence, neither Florence, neither San Diego colleagues and students that were here tonight. And I think that we will have to do an effort to improve the participation to a European and also US level. And so, but in any case, I'm very happy, and I hope that we all will be again here at the end of April. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.